The Salamanders Legion was the noblest and most heroic of all the Legiones Astartes, and none better embody this than Artellus Numeon. Being of the original Legion that was fully Terran-born, the legacy of Numeon encompasses nearly the entire history of the Salamanders as a Legion and beyond. Vulkan was among the first handful of Primarchs to be found by the Emperor, and then shortly followed by him being trained in the Imperium and its ways of war by Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands, who was also one of the first handful of Primarchs to be found in the early days of the Great Crusade. So among the Primarchs, Vulkan has had a long and glorious history with his Legion throughout the Wars of Unity. In saying that, his Legion in the early era of the Great Crusade didn't have some of the momentum and resources that later Legions would enjoy. In the early days, it was kind of all or nothing, and many Legions were not expected to survive. And in the late Unification Wars of Terra, the 18th Legion proved to be among the toughest and most enduring of the Legions. And during this time that it was just the 18th Legion, Artellus Numeon proved himself to be a courageous and noble warrior. However, Numeon was not only mighty in battle, but a cunning commander and a charismatic leader of men. It was just a matter of time before he rose to leadership within the 18th Legion that shortly into the Crusade took the name Dragon Warriors. The similarities the Dragon Warriors had with the later incarnation of the Salamanders of Nocturne is in many ways baffling, and might even make one believe in fate. They had similar rhetoric, such as a common saying in the Legion, "Bring the fire," or "into the fire," and the like. So, the obsession with fire was there from the beginning. The early 18th Legion also considered their sole purpose being the protection of humanity as a whole, from the powerful and rulers to the ordinary citizen. This noble nature and urge to protect the weak led to many unnecessary casualties in the early days of the Crusade, though they'd quickly become renowned as heroes of the people. And just like their later evolution, the Legion focused on patience, determination, and endurance. Artellus Numeon was a primary figure in the 18th Legion back in these days. Needless to say, when Primarch Vulkan was recovered by the Emperor and told about his gene sons from Terra, he was incredibly proud of them long before ever actually meeting them, because it would be some time before he'd take command of his Legion. Vulkan had an entire galaxy to learn about, and the advanced ways of war the Imperium utilized, but in secret, the humans of Nocturne were being recruited to become Astartes, and the Salamanders as we know them were coming into fruition. And by the time that Vulkan and his Salamanders were ready to join the rest of his Legion, the Dragon Warriors were facing their possible doom with stoic heroism. Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn brought his 19,000 Space Marines to a populated cluster of planets near the Terrace Division. No other legions responded to the distress signal. The 18th Legion stood alone against an Orc-Wa that outnumbered them in the millions. Mechanicum adepts estimated the Legion would survive a handful of days at most. Yet, with the massive human population at risk of extermination, the Dragon Warriors' choice to stand and fight was obvious and adhered to without hesitation. With the billions of civilians on the move away from the Wa, the war's main battles would occur on a primordial volcanic world. The attack moon of the Orcs seemingly supplied the Greenskins with an infinite amount of reinforcements. Captain Numeon led his warriors valiantly and saved many lives. In a particularly testing battle, the Lord Commander was mortally wounded by an Orc chieftain that left him crippled and on the verge of death, though he held on to consciousness long enough to appoint Artellus Numeon as the new Lord Commander of the 18th Legion in his place. The horrifically wounded Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn would regain consciousness from time to time, but from that point on, the war to save billions of innocent human lives was in the hands of Numeon. With his newly instated position, he quickly reorganized the 18th in stubborn, grinding defiance of the Orc hordes, though he did not simply fight in an attritional manner, but used clever ingenuity to manipulate the environment to commit massive casualties upon the Orcs. Numeon even detonated explosives within a volcano to take out an entire Orc army in a wave of lava. His abilities to adapt and be creative with odds stacked against him would define his capabilities as a general. In the end though, despite the overwhelming odds against them, the 18th Legion would not only survive, but have total victory over the orcs. Unknown to the 18th Legion on the planet, Vulkan had come to aid them in battle with his newly formed Salamanders of Nocturne. Vulkan assaulted the attack moon directly and slew the orc war boss in single combat, and then descended to the planet to aid the dragon warriors to dominate the orcs, to the point that they fled in a mindless horde and all of their chieftains were dead, and they were utterly crushed. Vulkan then warmly met the sons he'd never met and embraced them into the Salamanders Legion. Uniting the Terrans and Nocturnians into a single brotherhood was Vulkan's first goal. The Terrans were given much honor, and the Lord Commander Cassian Vaughn, wounded at the start of the war, was entombed within a dreadnought to continue his service to his beloved legion. Vulkan created the 7-man-strong Pyre Guard, and they were all Terrans like Numeon. His inner circle was similar to other legions like the Mournival of the Luna Wolves, the Trident of the Iron Warriors, etc. The Pyre Guard were also the most volcanic and experienced warriors of the Legion, being soldiers without equal, and Numeon being the first among them. Each of the Pyre Guard was also a formidable general, because they all, every single one, commanded an entire chapter of legionaries, with Numeon controlling the legendary Fire Drakes. The Pyre Guard equipment was all forged by the individual members themselves, and Artellus became a master craftsman under Vulkan's tutorship. And oddly enough, when Numeon and the rest of the Terrans went back to Nocturne with Vulkan, the gene seed of Vulkan and the radiation of Nocturne altered their skin tone of the former Dragon Warriors in a curious case of beneficial mutation, taking on the charcoal skin tone of the natives of Nocturne. Before long, the Legion was united in culture, mind, and body as one. However, the Terran-born Salamanders and Numeon would never fully embrace the Promethean cult's spiritual, shamanistic-like nature. It didn't matter though, because duty was the core tenet of the former Dragon Warriors. They then continued to win glory in the Great Crusade under the direct command of their Primarch, with Numeon being second in command from that point forward. For many years, well over a century, being one of the longest functioning Primarch Legion United faction in the Great Crusade, the Salamanders won compliance after compliance and were the foremost defenders of humanity. Few were as championed by ordinary Imperial citizens other than the greats like the Luna Wolves and Blood Angels. Artellus Numeon fought countless battles and purified the enemies of the Emperor relentlessly in flame. Then eventually came the Horus Heresy, and the betrayal that would utterly devastate the 18th Legion to the point that their numbers were whittled down to a little bit over 3,000 Space Marines. In one single battle, one of the longest serving legions to be united with their Primarch early in the Crusade burned in the fires of betrayal as their allies turned their guns against them with overwhelming superiority in numbers. In the span of a single battle, the Salamanders went from 89,000 Legionis Astartes strong to suffering 98% casualties. No other faction at the Black Sands of Isstvan suffered more than the Salamanders. However, there were other detachments, such as garrisons and other forces of them spread out in the void, so they did survive annihilation, though more casualties would follow. So the total numbers of the Legion at the end of the Horus Heresy is unknown. They did have enough numbers to make a chapter though, a full 1,000-man chapter, so we do know that. And they did participate in the Scouring, so the Salamanders were definitely tempered on the anvil of war, but would still go on to be a formidable fighting force for the Emperor. Upon the Black Sands of Isstvan, Numeon and the Fire Drakes fought Angron's bodyguard, the Devourers, and engaged the Death Guard and many other traitors before the truth of annihilation set in, when the reality of betrayal became apparent. Numeon was leading the charge against the Iron Warriors when Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Hands, laughed at Vulkan and taunted him to come get him while his Iron Warriors gunned down the Sons of Nocturne. And then An atomic strike, ordered by Perturabo, erupted in the heart of the Salamanders' forces. Numeon and the Pyre Guard were barely spared because they were so far ahead pushing forward, though from their point of view it looked like Vulkan had been killed. The Legion organization was shattered, and all they could do was get shot down by the traitors' numerical superiority or flee. Numeon drove what survivors he could to retreat aboard the Fire Ark, but that wasn't going to be easy, and the captain of the Pyre Guard was suffering from a plethora of wounds. What few survivors he could gather made it to an Iron Hand Stormbird, and they were quickly saved by Varud Pergelin, a famous member of Ferrus Manus' elite Morlocks. Numeon then quickly passed out from his wounds, and somehow he had escaped the fires of Isstvan V. Yet, of the 47 Legionis Astartes survivors that boarded the Stormbird, only 26 survived, the rest dying shortly afterwards from their wounds on the way to the Salamander's strike cruiser, the Fire Ark. Despite it seeming that Vulkan had perished, Artellus Numeon in his heart knew that Vulkan had survived. From that point on, Numeon spoke of hope, and his rhetoric revolved around heightening morale to the devastated Salamanders. He was the Salamander that began the mantra, "Vulkan lives," and it became a war cry of the Shattered Legion. Among them were also survivors of the Raven Guard and Iron Hands, and for the following months, the Fire Ark fought a guerrilla war in the void against the traitor forces, eventually following the word bearers to a planet whose human population had been utterly corrupted by the warp to the point that they were just mindless monstrosities. Discovering that the word bearers intended to recover an artifact on another inhabited planet of Veralis, Numeon and the Salamanders refused to allow the innocent population to suffer the same horrific end. Soon after, Artellus captured and interrogated the perpetual known as John Grammaticus, who told him that he was after a spear called the Fulgurite, a weapon the Emperor used to annihilate the forces of chaos millennia ago, eons before taking the title of Emperor. John Grammaticus also told Numeon that the spear was somehow linked to Vulkan, which piqued the captain's attention indeed. The spear was found, but with the word bearers encroaching, John betrayed Numeon and shot him in his helmet lens, blinding him in one eye and burning up his face pretty bad. And then he took the Fulgurite spear from him. But John didn't kill Numeon. As the Perpetual started to flee, Numeon was on his knees, gritting his teeth in pain, and asked John if Vulkan was genuinely alive. John told him that indeed he believed Vulkan lived. But then all of a sudden the word bearers showed up and shot Numeon in his back, to which he spilled over unconscious, and it looked like it was pretty much over for Artellus and John Grammaticus. However, out of nowhere, Erebus stepped through a warp rift into real space. He took the spear and slit the word-bearer commander's throat, then handed the spear back to Grammaticus and left. He didn't kill Numeon or mess with the Perpetual. It was pretty weird. But John Grammaticus, being John Grammaticus, took advantage of the situation and he went and found a gunship and escaped. Numeon did regain consciousness, but was soon captured by the word-bearers. Things weren't looking too good for Artellus Numeon. The traitors tortured him for some time and tested him as far as possible under such stress, though he endured. The horrors of the word-bearer's ship astonished Numeon. It was a nightmare made manifest. He wondered how the Legion had fallen to such depravity and evil without any other Imperial forces noticing. However, eventually, the word-bearer vessel was attacked by the Defiance of Calth, an Ultramarines strike cruiser. At this point in his capture, Numeon was chained to a sacrificial altar and probably had some horrific ritual waiting for him if the Ultramarines hadn't showed up. He broke his chains and fought half naked all the way to the bridge of the ship to enact vengeance. However, Ultramarines had boarded the ship and took Numeon back to their own ship to get some medical treatment. Once again, Artellus Numeon somehow barely survived a horrible fate. The Ultramarines took him back to Macragge, and he was told about how Vulkan did indeed survive Isstvan V, but he had been captured by Conrad Kurz and tortured to the point of insanity. Artellus was also happy that many Salamanders had survived and were on Macragge, as well as more Iron Hands and Raven Guard. There were also legionnaires of the Space Wolves and White Scars present on the planet. He was also pretty inspired because the Ultramarines, Blood Angels, and Dark Angels were still fully functional legions and formidable fighting forces. So he was pretty pumped that Loyalists weren't wiped out. Numeon was also told of the revealed perpetual nature of his Primarch, and that he'd actually died many times since his death on Isstvan. Numeon was told about Vulkan's arrival on Macragge by teleporting from the Nightfall, the Night Lord's flagship, right out into space and burned up in Macragge's atmosphere as his charred corpse fell to the planet's surface. And that not long after, he'd reformed to live once more, though completely consumed in madness. Numeon was told how Vulkan had chased his tormentor Conrad Kurz across Macragge while naked, and how the perpetual John Grammaticus had stabbed him with the very same esoteric spear forged by the Emperor himself that John Grammaticus and he had obtained before he was captured by the Wordbearers. Numeon was then proclaimed the commander of all remaining Salamanders and presented with new power armor and weapons suitable to his status. Once again, Artellus Numeon was the Lord Commander of the 18th Legion. When he went to go see Vulkan's body, it was gone, and supported by his new Ultramarine allies after killing some Wordbearers who'd escaped their cells and even took down the threat of a demon, he'd be a part of a citywide search for Vulkan's body, to which no one could find it anywhere. After a council of the surviving Salamanders, Numeon did some soul searching in a cemetery and was approached by Primarch Lionel Johnson himself. The Lion told him to uphold his honor and accept his duties to return to Nocturne. He told him he was still a warrior of the Imperium and that he doubted Terra had fallen. He did not have to remain on Macragge as many wanted. The Master of the Dark Angels also helped fortify him to fully accept his new position as the commander of all remaining Salamanders, then left Numeon alone in the cemetery. Oddly enough, after some deep thoughts and solitude, there before him in the graveyard was Vulkan's body. This bizarre and unexplained reunion instilled within Numeon an urge to return to Nocturne and a psychic imprint that somehow if Vulkan was returned to Mount Deathfire, he could be resurrected. Many believe that mysterious forces were at play there, but these questionable series of events have far more questions come forth than any answers. Did the Lion move Vulkan's body there? How did it get there? Who would move it there? Why did Numeon have such a strong belief that Vulkan could be resurrected if he was taken back to Nocturne? The Emperor must have been influencing this somehow, some way. In any case, with the miraculous recovery of their Primarch's body, the Salamanders soon left Imperium Secundus under Artellus Numeon's leadership to journey back to Nocturne. The journey was harrowing because of the ruin storm, if they'd make it at all. Rabute Gilliman thought it was suicide since not only the light of the Astronomicon was out, but they also didn't have the equivalent of the Pharos beacon like Macragge had, so traveling to Nocturne meant journeying through the warp blind. Artellus was convinced beyond reason this was the course they were to take, so they went anyway. During the journey, Artellus spent most of his time mourning over Vulkan's body. They soon received a distress signal from civilians aboard a fuel station called Rampart that was under attack by some Death Guard legionnaires. Sworn always to protect the weak, Numeon led a small force of Salamanders to confront them. Many were thrilled that Numeon was alive, but disappointed. His body was fully healed, but his mind was not the Numeon that they all once knew. He had been so incredibly traumatized, it was very apparent. The rest of the Salamanders hoped that the fires of battle would temper him back into shape upon the anvil of war. However, he almost immediately stepped down from leadership, giving the command to others, which greatly frustrated those who were worried about him. In the heat of battle, one of the Death Guard let off a toxic bomb of miasma that could kill them all. However, they knew the weapon well, being consistent rivals with the Death Guard throughout the Great Crusade after their Primarch was found, and knew that the weapon's potency could be rendered useless by fire. The only problem was that Artellus Numeon was right in the way of the Flamer. The choice was everyone dies or they torch Numeon, so they did what they had to do. The captain had long since lost his flame-repellent war gear, and everyone thought that they were witnessing the end of the Salamander's greatest hero. However, somehow he magically survived. The Emperor must have been directly watching over Numeon, which might explain, again, his unrealistic faith that Vulkan would be revived if they could get him back to Nocturne and Mount Deathfire. Numeon retook command after this, and the Salamanders would go on to defeat the Death Guard at the station and save the survivors. Upon the station, they came across one of Malkador's knights errant, who'd helped them in the conflict, though after leaving, they were being tailed by the Death Guard ship Necrotor, as well as word-bearers. And it was not long before the Death Guard legionnaires boarded them, to which Numeon defended the Primarch's body, but the traitors were eventually defeated. Later, the ship was assaulted by apparitions, and then demons themselves manifested. The Salamanders endured all the hardship sent their way, but things were not looking good for the Fireborn. That is, until Magnus the Red showed up. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns wanted to help his brother. There were few among the Primarchs that could match the intellect of Magnus and Vulkan. They were easily two of the most intelligent of all the Primarchs, and despite any differences that they may have had, Vulkan and Magnus were fond of one another. And it's thanks to Magnus the Red, the Salamanders entered real space. The demons dissipated, and they received Rogel Dorn's rallying cry to Terra to defend the throne world. Greatly relieved that Terra still stood, Numeon commanded them to go to Nocturne before they could answer the Praetorians' call. The resurrection of the Primarch was first and foremost above all other objectives. Through much sacrifice, they did eventually make it back to Nocturne. However, the Word-Bearers and the Death Guard were also bearing down on their homeworld. Though the warriors of Nocturne defeated the would-be invasion and brought Vulkan's body to Mount Deathfire at long last. Magnus the Red had given Numeon realization and clarity concerning what he only knew subconsciously. However, the ritual to revive Vulkan didn't work. Demoralized, Artellus Numeon reflected on the words of the Primarch and the Crimson King's vague rhetoric. Numeon threw himself into the flames of Mount Deathfire, sacrificing himself, which miraculously revived the fallen Lord of Drakes, and Vulkan lived once more, though Numeon would never see his Primarch again. The captain of the Pyre Guard's self-sacrifice was key to the esoteric rebirth of Vulkan.